Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar titled Following Up After the Interview. We're glad you're with us today. My name is Brian Allen. I am a senior consultant with Career Management Partners, and it'll be my pleasure to be your host for this 1 hour exploration of what do you do once the interview is over? How can you solidify your chances or perhaps calm your nerves for the period of time after an interview has concluded, but before you maybe get a job offer. So that is what we're going to cover today. Lots of information to cover. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Here's our agenda. We're going to be talking about things that you will need to know to be able to follow up effectively. And so these are things to be on the lookout for, or things to gather before you actually separate from the interview itself, whether in person or on video or phone or whatever. How you can follow up in writing, how you can follow up by phone, and how you can survive the waiting game, as well as what to do if, in fact, the job was offered to someone else and you have to deal with the rejection. At the end of the webinar, we will recap some of our key points, and hopefully this webinar will answer a lot of the questions you may have about how best to follow up after the interview. So what we want to start out with is 6 main areas, main things that you're going to want to need to know before the interview is over, the formal interview that is, the face-to-face or the on the phone or on the computer interview, so that you can follow up effectively. So let's look at the first thing that we think you need to know. What did the interviewer say was the next step in the hiring process? This is probably going to be in their hiring process. What's the next step for them? What's the next step for you? This is something you might actually want to ask at the end of the interview or at the end of one of the interviews that you have. For example, do you need to submit a list of references to them? Or do you need to interview with someone else? Is there some other people making a decision? And when will the hiring decision be made? That's one of the key questions that you're going to want to make sure you find out about. When will they be making a decision? Are they interviewing more candidates? That's entirely possible. Has the job description been formalized? And has the budget been approved for that job? Now, if you think about this, a lot of times companies will kind of jump the gun, and they'll interview candidates for a position that they actually have not yet gotten the permission from the finance and the legal departments or whoever has to get that authority to actually create the job. This is because businesses just have to, they have to have people to do the work. And sometimes in anticipating, they interview for the right person, anticipating that they're going to take some time to find the right person. And in the meantime, they're going through the steps to get the actual formal job created inside the organization. So these are legitimate questions that you might want to consider asking as far as what the next step might be in the hiring process. Another thing to consider: how do they prefer you to follow up with them? Do they prefer phone or email communication? This is something else that you want to make sure you ask before you separate from the interview itself. If you get the interviewer's business card, which is a good idea, I would ask for that. If they don't offer that to you, I would ask for that before I left the interview. Make sure that you have the correct spelling of his or her name. That's important. I mean, my name is Brian. There's a way to misspell that as far as I'm concerned that some people might do innocently. They don't intend to insult me, but it's a little bit of a rub if you don't spell my name correct. So let's, don't do that to someone else. What is their exact job title? What's their phone number and email? And again, how do they prefer to be reached? And if you don't have a phone or email, do you know how to go about getting it? I mean, is it perhaps you could get it from the receptionist or the whoever is welcoming you into the building where you're going to be doing the interview? Maybe that person can help you to get the interviewer's phone number or email contact. Third thing, did you forget anything important? Were there any questions that you had about the job that you forgot to ask, or maybe on the drive or the walk out of this building, there a question popped into your mind? Don't lose that question, because that can be the reason for a follow-up, either email message, or perhaps a phone call. Did you ask all the questions that you had wanted to ask about the company or the division or the job itself? Did you share all of your relevant experience and qualifications? Did you do a good enough job of selling yourself? That is a challenge for most people to sell themselves. And how well did you do? That's one thing to consider. Did the interviewer overlook some information that you considered to be important to the job? Important about you or important about the job, either one. So was there something that was overlooked? Another question is there an external recruiter involved in the process? And let me take a moment now to clarify some terms. When we're using the word recruiter, we are referring to someone who is not an internal employee of the company that has the opening, but is a HR professional or a talent scout, or maybe even called a headhunter, who is a separate external contracted person who is hired by the company to search for and find talent to fill a particular job opening. So they don't actually, when we say recruiter, we're not talking about somebody who's an inside employee of the company. But this recruiter might be the person who is reaching out to you to see if you have the qualifications the company's looking for. And then if so, they may introduce you to the company, and the interviewer then is the other phrase, the other name we're going to be concerned with. The interviewer we refer to as someone who is an internal employee of the company conducting the interview but still is employed by that company. So recruiter is an external party, and interviewer is the internal party in this scenario, if you will. So is there an external recruiter involved in the process? And after the interview is over, it may be a good idea for you to reach out to that external recruiter to get some feedback from them about what the interviewer might have shared with them about your performance during the interview. Of course, that would perhaps take some time, but the interviewer and the recruiters will be talking after the interview is over. That gives you an opportunity to get some feedback about how you performed. Maybe the recruiter calls you up to share that feedback with you. And frankly, any kind of feedback you might get, whether good or bad, would be a valuable thing for you to receive. Because if it's good feedback, then that helps you to understand how well you performed. If it's bad feedback, that helps you to understand how you can perform better next time. But you have to be in a state of mind to receive that kind of feedback. Now, let me just mention that when we're talking about feedback as far as your performance during an interview, internal people, interviewers are probably going to be hesitant, if not prohibited, from sharing feedback with you about your performance, especially if you were not selected for the job ultimately, because that's the sort of thing that can kind of get them into legal trouble or discrimination or hiring practice challenges and that sort of thing. The external recruiter, however, the third-party recruiter, is not limited by that. If they can pass on whatever feedback they get to you. So they're more likely to give you feedback being the external recruiter. You may want to ask ask the interviewer about the role the recruiter will play if there is one present. Now, not always will you be introduced to a job through a recruiter. You may find it on your own and there's not a recruiter involved. But if there is one, you need to understand how that recruiter will be involved during the hiring process. And at least make sure you thank the recruiter who introduced you to the company for the interview. And maybe that recruiter can give you some inside knowledge about what the next steps might be, or maybe they have some other jobs that they have you in mind for that they could also set up an interview for you. So if you're working with an external recruiter or multiple external recruiters, it's a good idea to keep them in the loop and to be friends with them and to take advantage of the information, the feedback, the knowledge that they can share with you about the various positions that they might introduce you to. So if there is a recruiter involved, keep him or her in the loop and take advantage of their knowledge. Now, maybe you have found out about the job not through an external recruiter, but through a personal contact, someone in your network, maybe an ex-colleague or a family member or a neighbor or a friend who knew there was an opening in their company and introduced you to the company and was perhaps responsible for you getting an interview. Well, after the interview is over, you want to reach out to them, let them know how the interview went, let them know that you appreciate their time and information. Will they serve as a reference for you? Will they put in a good word for you? Maybe you can prepare a reference statement that you might submit to them that they could be happy just to sign, and rather than have to create one on their own. Have you let them know how the interview went and asked them to share any feedback they hear about your interview or your candidacy if they hear it? Perhaps the networking contact is going to be willing to maybe put in a good word with the hiring manager, or perhaps somehow try to influence the decision in your favor. Well, that could be a good thing, and so you need to follow up with your networking friend or whoever introduced you to the job. And finally, you need to determine, after having gone on the interview and learning more about the job and seeing someone or some people who are in that company, and perhaps even seeing the facility itself where your work would be done, you need to also answer the question about whether this job is something you'll be happy at 6 months from now. And if you see some things that concern you, or you hear some things, or if the interviewer tells you certain conditions that surprise you and that disappoint, it could be that you have a decision to say yes or no to the job as well. So if it fits your skill sets and interests and matches your compensation expectations, or at least is in line, maybe not match. Maybe if you feel that the company is in favorable light and the interviewer made a good impression on you, maybe you did receive some feedback, and maybe it was good and maybe it was not so good. But were you able to meet any of the potential coworkers or see where your office might be? All of these things can happen during an interview and can influence whether you think that this job is a good fit for you. It's not just that you have to hopefully get selected by the company. You have a stake in this as well, so you need to make sure that the company and the opportunity is going to be right for you down the road. 6 months from now, will you still be as enthusiastic about that job as you are on the day you interview? So these are some things that you need to know in order to be prepared to follow up effectively. Now, let's talk about following up after an interview in written format. And there's a number of different ways. And one of the more common questions that I get about following up is it okay to send an email, or do I have to send a written letter, or perhaps a handwritten card of some sort? Well, in today's marketplace, emails are perfectly acceptable. You can do that quickly. It's not that hard for you to compose an email, perhaps, or maybe you have sent some thank you emails in the past and can cut and paste from one. So an email is a relatively labor-free way to respond. We suggest within 24 hours for a couple of reasons. The fact that you're interviewing and you are interviewing for this company, and all of your consciousness is probably focused on this company. You may have multiple interviews and you're going to different places and talking to different people, but perhaps not. Perhaps you have fewer interviews, and so each one is going to be more memorable in your mind and easier for you to remember the details of the interviews. But put yourself into the shoes of that interviewer. He or she may be interviewing 10 people each day for the same job. And when you walk out the door, moments later, another qualified candidate might walk back into the door and another interview begins, and so on and so on. So the reason to follow up within 24 hours, one of the reasons to follow up within 24 hours, is simply to put your name and your candidacy back in front of the interviewer's consciousness or his or her radar within a short amount of time, so that they can help to remember you, rather than allowing distance and time to allow them to forget you. And it does happen. So send something within 24 hours. When you do send, make sure you make it easy for them to know how to reach out to you. So your contact information should be included in whatever correspondence you send, whether it's your email address and your phone number and your LinkedIn address, or all three of those. Make it easy for them to follow up with you if they choose to do so. Be specific about the job title that you interviewed for, because again, they may be interviewing for a number of different jobs, and again, seeing a number of people for a number of different jobs, it would help them for you to include in the email the job title, perhaps even the job code, which many companies will put in their job descriptions, the actual job number or whatever they call it. If you can include that, that would help them also. Now be careful though, you may have had a great interview and felt like you really developed a level of rapport with the interviewer, and that maybe you feel like you'd be on first name basis, but I would hesitate to act upon that impulse. Use their first name. Don't be too informal. Don't say, "Hey, how's it going?" If this is a business, this is an important business decision. You need to deal with this person and handle yourself in a professional way. So address them, with their first name if you can. Hopefully that you got that. Remember, that was one of the things you needed to know before you were able to follow up, and this is how it can work. The question about email or letter, I would suggest, though, that the easier it is for you to follow up, the less of an impact that follow-up will have. So if it's easy to dash off a quick email as a follow-up, then that's good. However, it may be better if you composed a letter that a little bit more formal. It takes a little more time and effort to do that. It gives you more space. You're going to be able to elaborate a little bit, and we'll show you an example of a follow-up letter here in a moment just to give you some ideas of what one might look like. But a quick email being easy and simple to do may not have as much impact as a formalized letter that you can create. Or it may not have as much impact as a handwritten note on a small thank you card or some sort of correspondence, maybe a greeting card of some sort that has your initials on it. Maybe if you have that. I don't suggest you have to run out to a stationery store and invest in that sort of thing, but you may have some cards that you might send that could be professional looking. That could be a way for you. And then handwriting, of course, that takes a little bit more. It's much more personal. It can be dangerous if your handwriting is atrocious. So if you're going to choose to write, you make sure your handwriting is very legible to do so. But I would suggest that the more effort that your follow-up note requires of you, the more positive impact that will have on the person that you send that note to. So an email is allowed, written letters are allowed, handwritten notes are allowed, but I think the ones that are more difficult to do are going to have more of a positive impact when they're received. Just a thought. Should you attach your resume? It's maybe a good idea just to remind them who you are. Maybe they did not have a copy of your resume during the interview, and the follow-up letter might be a way for you to attach your resume as well. However, sending an email attachment to a business address that you've never communicated with before might cause that business address to be suspicious of you and to not, to put your email message into spam. So you got to be careful. Some companies don't allow attachments from unknown senders because of potential for hacking and that sort of thing. If you already have emailed the interviewer prior to the interview, and it may be okay, then you may be recognized by the system and you can send an email attachment with your resume. It may be easier, however, just to put a hyperlink into your email message of your LinkedIn profile URL address, if you do have one. Now again, if we're talking today and you don't have a LinkedIn profile, that might be something that you really need to think about doing in order to help you compete effectively in the job market today, because LinkedIn is extremely important and powerful, and it's just all kinds of great results that you can get from being a job seeker by having a profile inside of LinkedIn. But that is to be addressed in another webinar later on. So you can attach your resume, but you may just want to attach your LinkedIn profile. So when you are sending a letter, what are you going to say? Well, you want to thank them, first of all, and that should be the very first thing you say, is some sort of a thanks for their time, thanks for giving them information, thanks for welcoming them, something like that. Again, in that correspondence, mention the exact title of the job along with whatever the division or whatever the number is of the job is. Clarify as much as you can to help them understand who you are and what you're writing about. Let them know, again, maybe this is going to be an overkill, you might think, but don't. You're still in the sales mode here, so don't miss an opportunity to state your case. Let them know about the qualifications that you feel match the requirements that they discussed or that they brought forward during the interview, especially if you feel you did not do a good enough job of comparing those to your qualifications during the interview itself. This is a way you can perhaps make up ground that you might have lost during that interview, is with this follow-up letter. You may want to say something along the lines of, I was especially interested in your comments about, if something they said is something you would want to expand upon or answer or bring focus to during your follow-up letter. And again, that can also help them remember you because of that particular part of the conversation, if it's unique. Maybe it's the same thing they say to everybody, but again, you're giving them a chance to remember who you are. And then conclude the note or the letter by stating that you're still interested and that you're excited about the opportunity and that you look forward to hearing from them, or don't hesitate to let me know how I can help make this process move along. Something like that to let them know that you're eager and and that you're positive and that you're optimistic about the opportunity. That your follow-up correspondence must have a optimistic, positive, forward-thinking kind of attitude about it. And if that's difficult for you, you may want to make sure somebody has a chance to look over that message before you send it. How long should the message be? There's no hard and fast rule, but they're business people. They're probably busy, so they probably don't have the time to go in depth with long correspondence. So be concise and businesslike. 3 or 4 brief paragraphs covering the things that I mentioned just a moment ago should be sufficient. And again, it's a very good idea, because if you rush through and dash off something and send it, and it contains poor grammar or misspelling or whatever kinds of errors, that's just not going to look good, is it? You want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward at all times. So you may want to try to allow for somebody else who you know and who perhaps is skilled at finding mistakes and things, proofread your letter, or maybe even comment on it, or maybe help you to polish it up a little bit. That could be something that your consultant that's assigned to you through Career Management Partners would be happy to help you to do. But you may also have a good friend who's very nitpicky and very detail-oriented who would be maybe happy to do that for you as well. Now, here's an example of a email message. And it looks more like a letter, so, but again, this is only an example. You do not have to, copy this exactly, but it begins with the name of this, in the subject line of the email address, you're putting the job title and then the word interview. You're using their name. You're saying it was a pleasure to meet them and putting the date in. That helps them, again, peg who you are, because they can go back to their notes for the day you interviewed. I appreciate your time to discuss the position you currently have for, and then mention the job. I was especially interested in your comments about, again, if you can remember something they mentioned, that can help them remember who you are. Second paragraph, after our discussion, I have a clear understanding of the responsibility, the priorities, and the expectations. With this clarity, I feel confident my qualifications match. Specifically, these include, and then qualification A matches one requirement, qualification B matches another qualification. This is how you can continue to put your best foot forward, or sell yourself when this is an appropriate way and a time to do this as well. The next paragraph, and this is optional, it occurred to me that I should also have mentioned something that you maybe forgot to mention. This is a way to cover up that forgetfulness. I look forward to the next step in the hiring process and meeting with you again. As you suggested, I will call you next week to set a time and date for a follow-up meeting. Of course, if that did not happen, you can't say that, can you? We're only giving you suggestions here. And then yours truly with your name. So again, this is a sample, an example of a follow-up letter, but it does not have to be exact. But you notice it thanks them, it gives them, it helps them remember who you are and when you interviewed and for what. Again, that's going to help to bring yourself to the front of their memory. You're going to continue to sell yourself, and then at the end, you're thanking them and you're setting up something for the future as well. All of those things make for an effective follow-up email or letter. Written message. Now, what about a phone call follow-up? And here's the 3 cardinal rules about following up after an interview. 1 is pick up the phone. 2, pick up the phone. 3 is to pick up the phone. I think this, and we're stressing this because we understand that letter, many people think is sufficient. Just send off a quick note, whew, now I've followed up and now I just have to wait. That's really not smart. You need to be willing and able to follow up with the phone call to the hiring person, to the interviewer, whomever whose number you have, in order to solidify your chances of getting the job. And if you're concerned, or if it's intimidating, or you have phone phobia or whatever, that is a problem. That's a hurdle that you need to get over. It is also something your consultant perhaps can help you with. But a written follow-up is more for immediate impact, an immediate reminder of who I am. But by itself, it's not sufficient for follow-up. Now, when should you make a phone call? We suggested that the written email or letter follow-up should be within 24 hours. The phone follow-up should be kind of predicated upon their indication of what the next step would be. When are they going to be making a decision? Well, it's at the end of the month. Well, if you start calling them before the end of the month, you run the risk of becoming a pest or jumping the gun. Some people will suggest that it's worth the risk to do that. I'm not going to get into that debate now, but again, you may want to, especially if they stress the time frame at the end of the interview, you may want to be aware of and honor that time frame. However, once that time frame has passed, then a phone call as a follow-up is appropriate and is something that you should be able to do. Now, why are we stressing phone calls? Well, after a thank you note, a phone call can still support and deepen a strong personal lasting impression. It will say that, you know, this is important to me, and I'm not just going to disappear. I want this job enough to make a phone call to follow up with you. It can help speed up the decision in your favor. It allows the interviewer then perhaps to ask you more questions or provide some new information, and you never know what's changing after the interview is over, other than you can predict it probably has been something changed, because that's just the world we're living today. But it also maybe gives you an opportunity to get some feedback on how you performed. Again, internal people are going to be perhaps more hesitant to share that feedback because of, you know, potential litigation, and they could get in hot water sort of things. But again, the external recruiter that may have sent you could give you some feedback. But this also, the phone call demonstrates that you're a confident professional who may be more worthy of the job than perhaps they might have thought simply because of the interview itself. And it also gets results. A follow-up phone call can really make things happen for you. So be prepared to make a phone call. Now, what do you say? Well, obviously you need to state your name clearly. Obviously you need to let them know of the job you interviewed for, when it was, the job, let them remember you as what job you're interviewing for. Say it was a pleasure to meet them, and then talk about the purpose of your call, which there are a number of options that you might have as a purpose for your call. You might want to just say you're following up with the next steps and to see what the next step is in the hiring process. Or you are calling to obtain some feedback about how your qualifications are stacking up against some of the other candidates. Or you may be calling to restate your continued interest and enthusiasm about the position in the company. Or you may be calling to provide some information that you did not share, or you forgot to share, or you overlooked during the interview. Perhaps you're calling to simply request a second interview. Or maybe you're inquiring if there are other people in the hiring process that you might want to reach out to. All of those things are possible. If they say no to those things, that's not the end of the world. But the fact that you're willing to call and initiate a follow-up phone call like this says a lot about you, and it says a lot positively about the kind of candidate that you might be if they hire you. Is it going to get you the job if you really blew the interview? No, probably not. However, it does happen that a poor initial interview can be resurrected, or a candidate might be given a second chance after a poor interview if they follow up effectively with a letter and a phone call. These things do happen. So it's worth the effort, it's worth the challenge, it's worth the risk that you may take to make a phone call with someone who is, in a position to be very important in a role that you have a lot of anxiety around. Don't think, though, that it's something you cannot do. You can do it, and it does help. Now, the waiting game. When the interview has concluded and you've done your written follow-up within 24 hours, and then the clock is ticking because the deadline that they have said that they've set for themselves to make a decision has not yet happened, and you're still eager to find out, but there's a waiting game going on. How do you survive that? It can take weeks, and the fact that you don't hear anything, no news may not be bad news. No news might be good news. It could be that the reason it's taking longer is that they're looking deeper into your background. And if you do have a LinkedIn profile, it's important for you to kind of watch LinkedIn to see if someone is viewing your profile from that company after the interview, which is a very common thing, by the way. Interviewers and companies are beginning to trust LinkedIn very deeply and involving them almost every time in their interview process. If not originally to get a list of candidates, but then certainly to follow up with the candidates who they have interviewed with to learn more about them. Social media is here to stay, and LinkedIn is the professional side of that social media that really is impactful and powerful in a modern job search. So, but anyway, there's all kinds of things that can take time and delay the actual decision. It could be that maybe you need to meet with somebody else inside the company, or that the decision maker, whoever he or she is, which often is not the same as the person who initially interviewed you, by the way. That person may be traveling, or maybe on vacation, or maybe there's a business priority that's taken their attention away from the hiring process. Maybe they're conducting a background check on you. And maybe your references are being contacted. By the way, if the company asks from you a list of references, that's a very good sign. Because if they're really not that interested in you, they're not going to bother to follow up with your references. So, again, just a kind of a rule here: if they ask for your references, that's a sign that you're in the running. That's not necessarily to say that you're the one, but it is, at least it says you're in the running. Or maybe the budget for that job may need to still be finalized. Or maybe they are so impressed with you, but they figure that they can't afford you at the price that they originally have set for paying you that job, and maybe they're going back to bump that compensation up a little bit. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? Maybe other candidates are being interviewed, and they have to go through the motions of interviewing qualified candidates, or else they run the risk of being guilty of and accused of unfair hiring practices. And there's just 1,000 other things that might delay or interrupt the process for hiring you that you're not aware of, and you're blind to them, and therefore you're alone in your world, and there's no news coming from them, and you start to assume the worst. Please do yourself a favor and guard against that kind of thought process. No news is not necessarily bad news. So what do you do to survive the waiting game? Well, I'm sorry, let me touch on a few other milestones here that kind of let you know if you're in the running and what that might, good news could sound like. If you get a call back, obviously, for additional second or third interviews, that's obviously a good sign that they're looking even closer at you. If they do request a list of your references, which, by the way, you should have prepared ahead of time. This is not something to pull together at the very last moment after an interview. This should be something you've thought about, and you've identified 6 to 10 or 12 people that know you, know your work ethic, know your personal character, can vouch for you, whether they're an ex-boss, an ex-colleague, an ex-employee of yours, or a customer of yours perhaps, or someone that has known you all your life, or someone who knows you in your volunteer role, or sees you at church, or whomever. You do need to identify people, and then not just put their name on a piece of paper, but you need to reach out to those people and to get their permission to be used as a reference by you. They should approve that. And as you're getting that approval, you want to verify their current contact information, phone numbers, emails, those things can change. Mailing addresses, those things can change. Companies and titles, those things can change. And you may have been out of touch with someone for a while, and it would be very embarrassing to put reference information down and that the company is interested in you, and so they call that reference person and they can't reach them because the phone's been disconnected, or the phone is no longer in working service. I mean, so you just need to do your diligence and have your references ready to go. By the way, it's also a good idea for you to send a copy of your most recent resume to your references and ask for feedback from them as to if it's telling your story effectively. Again, your references ought to be part of your network, so solicit their help and let them know the kinds of positions that you're looking for during your period of career transition. What are the companies that you're targeting? What kind of roles are you looking for? Help them to help you be on the lookout for these things. So references are an important part of your search process, and the list of references should be something that you're prepared and ready to go with before an interview happens. If you get a benefits package, that's a good sign that they are considering you, and you may want to look that over carefully, but just the fact that they gave you a benefits packet is a good sign. If they make some comments during the interview that suggest that in their mind you match what they're looking for, that's a good sign. It's not an offer of a job, however, but it is a good sign. And if you get positive feedback from the recruiter that the interviewer had shared with them about you made an impressive case, that they were eager to learn more about you or something like that, all these are good signs that you are in the running. So, be looking for these signs during the time before you hear back definitely, formally from the company. But these can be good signs that you're in the running. And especially the best sign is if you receive a written job offer from the company. But that may not happen after the first interview. That may happen after, second or third follow-up interviews. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, you've got your references all taken care of. Don't just sit by the phone and wait for it to ring. Don't just, watch your email inbox to see if there's an offer coming. Stay busy. Keep your job search activity level up. So keep networking. Talk to people you know. Reach out to people. Add to your LinkedIn list of contacts. Set some goals for yourself every week of how many people you're going to reach out to. Some may be local, and I would suggest that you also need to set a goal of meeting a certain number of people face-to-face each week for coffee, breakfast, cocktails, or something like that. Face-to-face conversations have a much better chance of turning into some sort of fruitful meeting than do just emails or phone conversations. Emails are easiest, but they have the least chance for success. Phone calls are a little bit harder, but they have a little bit better chance of success. Face-to-face meetings are more difficult to do, but they have the highest rate of success as far as you learning more, getting more input, or help, getting more leads from your network. So networking is critical, maybe the most important thing throughout your entire job search, but certainly after an interview is over. Keep networking. The statistics here on this bullet is critical. I've heard of 85, 75, somewhere around 80% of the jobs found every year originated in some sort of a networking contact. So your network is a living, breathing thing that you should be courting and grooming and nourishing on a daily basis, especially after an interview before you hear something. Keep working on your network. Actually, keep working on your network even after you take your next job, because networking is something that's not just for job search. It is a career tool for the rest of your life. You can continue to look at job boards. Again, if 80% of jobs come through networking, then only 20% of jobs come through job boards, so to speak. So, use your time appropriately in that regard, but don't ignore the job boards. And keep learning and keep polishing and keep improving your resume. You may have learned something during the interview that lets you know that there's a certain skill set that you did not bring forward very strongly in your resume that is perhaps in high demand today for the kinds of jobs you're looking for the kinds of companies you want to work for. Well, that might mean that you want to go back and polish that up and bring more attention to that skill set in your resume. So, there are things that you can do to occupy your time while you're waiting. A mistake would be to halt all your job search or your networking activity and sit by and wait for the phone to ring. That would be a mistake. That would be stopping your momentum and working backwards, and you don't want to do that. Hopefully then the waiting game ends when you get another invitation to come back and interview for a second or third time, perhaps to meet with someone else in the company, perhaps to meet with some coworkers who would be colleagues if you did get the job, perhaps to see a site visit where you're given a tour of the facility and shown where the work is and where you would be sitting. And those, if again, if you're invited to do those things, those are all very, very strong signs that you're the one they want to hire. And of course, a job offer, which you should always ask for in writing, by the way. A verbal job offer is a little bit of a dangerous thing. So ask for it in writing, and also then ask for some time to consider the job offer. You may be so eager and so excited that they've offered you a job that you're willing to say yes on the phone immediately. That might not be the smartest thing to do. And if you don't say yes immediately, they're not going to think badly of you. Again, this is a professional situation, so they're making a big decision. They've taken some time to decide upon you. Well, you deserve the same respect. You deserve some time to make sure that they are the right offer for you. So ask for some time. Ask for an offer in writing. If they haven't shared benefits when they do make you an offer, now's the time for you to ask about your benefits and vacations and all the other 1,000 things that can go into a job offer negotiation, which, by the way, is the topic of another webinar that we have about negotiating job offers that you might want to consider signing up for at some point. But the waiting game, you know, the end of the waiting game is when an offer comes, or when you find out that the offer has gone to someone else. By the way, I don't suggest that, well, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's move into the final stage of our program here. And it's what to do if, in fact, the offer is extended to someone else and you did not get the job. How do you handle that rejection? We suggest that, you know, handle it positively. Now, you know, your initial reaction might be, you know, if you get it on the phone, you might want to be positive with your attitude, hang up the phone and then start crying or whatever. Don't share your negative emotion, however, with anybody, but don't ignore negative emotions either. It's a, you know, it's a bad news. You feel bad about it, especially if it was a job you were very excited about. Allow yourself to grieve a little bit, but don't allow yourself to lose control. If you are speaking, however, with the person who's involved, if they give you the courtesy of a phone call or an email to let you know that they selected someone else, that in fact is a compliment, because no company is required to do that. They can simply just ignore you, and those candidates that they did not hire, they can ignore and never reach out to. If you've found out from a company that you interviewed with that they hired somebody else in a formal way, that company is saying to you, we liked you, and we couldn't hire you because maybe there were, you know, you were one of 2 or 3 excellent candidates, but we had only one position to offer. So you may not want to necessarily take rejection as a final or as a never ever, or that you failed in some way. That may not be the only way to look at the, if you want to call it rejection, or look at the outcome that somebody else got the job. So again, be positive. Thank them for considering you. Communicate to them that you still are interested in the company, and let them know that you're still interested and the door is open. In fact, if they want to reach out to you again, there could be other opportunities within the company that are not yet available but maybe coming up soon that you would be a good candidate for. You want to make them remember you and perhaps consider you for those other positions. And you just never know. It could be, well, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Request that they consider you for any new opportunities that might open up. And then make a note on your calendar to follow up with them again, maybe 1 month, maybe 2 months down the road, because you never know that the person who they did hire back then may not work out. They may not have passed a drug test. They may not have passed their probationary period. They may not have been able to successfully complete the orientation process, or maybe they got hired and they just turned out not to be the candidate that they interviewed for, or that they presented during an interview. All of those kinds of things can happen. And so it could be in a short amount of time they're regretting that hire, and they were remembering that there was another person that we hired we were impressed with, but who was that? If you keep following up, that again lets them know that, you know, again, you're professional and that you do things right, and that they may look at you a second time. That can happen. It happens more often than you may realize. If, however, you do land a position somewhere else, it's probably a professional and an ethical and in a good manners kind of a thing for you to follow up with companies that you had interviewed with and letting them know of your success. Follow up with people, the recruiters who have perhaps introduced you, and let them know you've landed, and let them know when and where you've landed, and thank them for their help during your search. If your networking contacts have helped you find a job, go back and let them know when you land. Again, keep people informed of your status so that they're, they can share in your success, but also that they don't have to keep looking for opportunities for you if in fact you found another one. And then keep practicing your interviewing skills. Even though you've interviewed and you've got a new job, you still need to be able to sell yourself. And again, in today's marketplace, you just never know when you might find yourself in another transition period in the future. How far down the line there may be before you're going to go through this again. Through no fault of your own, it's just the kind of the nature of the employment marketplace that we live in today. Nothing is guaranteed anymore. You actually probably it's going to be smart throughout the rest of your career that you keep up on your networking, have your resume updated, and make sure you add to your resume any accomplishments that you feel good about having achieved in whatever role you currently are in. Any new skills or new certifications or new training programs or new learning that you gain on the job, make sure you are documenting that some way in your resume and or in your LinkedIn profile as well. Keep up with your network. Expand your network. Look for new opportunities to meet new people, maybe in the new company that you've joined, but also in professional associations. You may want to be in a role where you can attend conferences or workshops or conventions related to the work that you do, and those are wonderful opportunities to expand your network. All of this is a smart thing to do in order to be prepared for the next time you might find yourself looking for your next opportunity. If you're not offered the job, one way to look at it is to think that just simply means there is another better job waiting for you to find it. And again, that's the optimistic point of view. But again, we suggest that's the better attitude to have about job search rather than the pessimistic or the nobody will hire me or I'm too old or et cetera, all those negative things. That really it's going to be counterproductive and really work against you. So we strongly consider you to consider the optimistic point of view and to work toward the next opportunity, even if you have landed a job. Okay, so that's our presentation. Just to recap, get as much information as possible before, during the interview as what the next steps might be to help you to know how to properly follow up. How will you then determine to thank the interviewer and follow up with them? Is it going to be written? Is it going to be handwritten or an email? Is it going to be a phone call, and when? If there's a recruiter involved, follow up with them and ask for their feedback or ask them to consider you for other positions they may be aware of. A successful fit means that you're right for the job, but also that the job is right for you. And in any kind of a job offer, the company and you both need to be comfortable and confident about the wisdom of the decision that you both make, the wisdom that they made to hire you and the wisdom that you made to accept their offer. That's a win-win situation. And if 6 months down the road, either of you have regretted that decision, you may find yourself right back in the same unemployment box again. Are there any networking contacts that you want to follow up with who have perhaps helped you? Make sure you send a thank you email within 24 hours after the interview is over, and then a follow-up phone call at the appropriate time after the time frame they indicate has expired to keep the process moving forward. And then manage that waiting game and manage perhaps the potential of rejection if that does come. Remember, the conclusion of the interview is not the end of the process, but the beginning of the next phase of the process. We hope that this presentation has helped open your eyes and understand some things. We realize, however, that you probably do have questions. Unfortunately, being a recording, I cannot handle your questions now, but we are happy to respond by email. So if you have any questions about any of the things we've posed in this webinar, please feel free to contact us at www.careermp.com, and then simply let us know that you attended or you listened to a webinar and you have questions about, and someone will get back in touch with you. Well, I thank you for your attention. and your willingness to learn about following up after the interview. I hope that we have given you some good insight and some information to use to make your job search more effective. That's what we do here. That's what we're all about. We want to help make your job search as successful and as positive and as short as possible. And that's who we are. We're Career Management Partners. This has been a presentation of CMP. My name is Brian Allen, and I look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon. Take care and goodbye.